Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel with Right Side Blonde. Today I'm going to bring you the December 1997 issue with Kevin Costner on the front. And this cover brings up a good point I don't think I've ever shared yet, which is that on every George cover, or most George covers, there is a hidden George Washington profile. So if you look closely on this cover, Kevin Costner is throwing up a quarter and you can see George Washington's profile on that. But on most of the other covers, there's a hide and seek of the George Washington profile. And then in the next issue, they show you where it was in the previous issue. Kind of fun. The article I'm going to read today is called The Hollywood Hustle by Stephen Glass, and it is talking about celebrities and their role in Washington. Here we go. The Hollywood Hustle. More and more celebrities are flocking to Washington to promote their causes, and politicians treat them like royalty. Why? Because Washington can't work without star power. Several floors below the Capitol Dome in Washington, about 50 reporters, congressional staffers, and cameramen have packed themselves into a sterile brown room. They are listening to a graying man from the American Humane Association ramble on about a proposal to study whether there is a scientific link between people who commit violence against animals and people who commit violence against people. Actually, to say the audience is listening may be overstating the case. They are whispering, yawning, popping gum, and making that crackling sound with candy wrappers that precedes Broadway musicals. But all the noise stops the moment soap opera actress Joan Van Ark steps onto the podium. The slinky former Knots Landing star inhales deeply before launching into an impassioned monologue about animal abuse. She laments that most violent convicts in their youth had abused animals. After a few horrific tales, Van Ark concludes with a slight bow. The congressional aides applaud wildly. I can't believe how many people came to this press conference, says California Congressman Sam Farr, before promising to push for the AHA study. The attendance is especially surprising because at the same time, just a few blocks away, President Clinton and congressional leaders are announcing the balanced budget deal, the most important political news of the summer, if not the year. But for many reporters, Van Ark is the sexier story. For decades, Washington has attracted famously activist actors such as Jane Fonda and Charlton Heston. But the city's elite scoffed at the performers, urging them to tend to entertainment and let real politicians worry about the nation's business. Over the past few years, however, this historic irritation has transformed into a reluctant appreciation of the power of celebrity. Why? Because lawmakers realize that having a Hollywood luminary at a hearing may be the best way to get a cynical public to tune in to their issue. A star's endorsement can mean the difference between a bill that dies in committee and one that becomes law. As a result, the number of stars trooping to Capitol Hill has reportedly doubled since 1994. Even that year, during a single week, actor Tom Selleck testified on the importance of personal integrity, director Steven Spielberg endorsed the Hate Crime Statistics Act, and 2 Pearl Jam musicians told a House committee that Ticketmaster monopolized concert ticket sales. Congressmen want celebrities because they bring attention to what's important to the politician, explains Newt Gingrich's confidant Grover Norquist. A Gingrich aide puts it more strongly. Saying any politician wants celebrities is like saying people want oxygen, he says, laughing. We need them to live. There can be tangible benefits for the stars as well. Consider the case of Christopher Reeve, the paralyzed actor. From 1994 until 1996, lobbyists repeatedly tried to schedule congressional lunches for victims of spinal cord injury, but could barely interest committee staffers, let alone senators. However, when Reeve decided to take his cause to Washington, he had no trouble getting an audience. On May 15, 1996, the former Superman met with the president at the White House. Shortly after Reeve left, Clinton announced that he would ask Congress to allocate an extra $10 million more for research into spinal cord injuries. Congressional Republicans, worried that they would miss out on the love fest, insisted on having a lunch with Reeve as well. Years earlier, the GOP shunned Reeve, a Democrat who appeared at photo ops with Vice President Al Gore cleaning up polluted beaches. But now, dressed in a blue jacket with a navy and white striped shirt, Reeve, 45, told the Republicans who were lucky enough to get invited that since his accident, he needs help getting dressed and that his wife has fought for years with the insurance company over the cost of his treatment. One congressman wept. I was riveted, says the lawmaker. I didn't even realize the tears were streaming down my cheeks. In the middle of the meal, Reeve asked the legislators to spend more on spinal cord research. Congress had already allocated more than $40 million that year, but, Reeve said, with additional funds, he could be walking by his 50th birthday. I would like to stand up and toast everyone at the party. GOP Senator Arlen Specter, who heads a health subcommittee, called for a $40 million hike for the research. The House Commerce Committee dusted off a bill to boost funding that had lingered in committee for a year and a half. Faster than a speeding bullet, the bill passed the full House in mid-June and was approved by the Senate a month later. Strangely, no one bothered to ask National Institutes of Health, the agency that would receive the money, whether the bill was a good idea. In fact, NIH had reservations. Government researchers have found that earmarking funds for specific diseases is wasteful. But Congress and the White House shifted $10 million from other NIH budgets into spinal cord research. Months later, Reeve returned the favor by speaking at the Democratic convention. So prevalent have celebrity endorsements become that a Democratic pollster named Tom Yamuda prepared a study on the phenomenon, titled Celebrities Equals Cell-ebrities. The report concludes that having celluloid heroes on your side is the very best way to get your wish to become law. Legislation that is publicly supported by a highly recognizable star is 10 times more likely to pass the House and Senate. The study also found that celebrities who call the senator's office can usually get a meeting the next day. Average constituents, if they can get a meeting at all, usually need to schedule months in advance. Not only are politicians happy to squeeze a superstar into their schedule, but they also put up with behavior that constituents could never get away with. 2 years ago, actress Melanie Griffith scheduled a meeting with Michigan Senator Spencer Abraham to talk about arts funding. When Abraham started to chat with Griffith, she fell asleep. The freshman senator politely let her doze while he strolled to the Senate floor for a vote. On his return, an awake Griffith explained that she'd had a long trip. The two resumed chatting, and Griffith nodded off again. Sometimes politicians will do just about anything to meet stars. In September, actor John Travolta spent 48 hours on the Hill wooing members of Congress on behalf of the Church of Scientology. While his primary mission was to testify before Republican Senator Alphonse D'Amato's Commission on Religious Tolerance, Travolta also had private meetings with Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle and an hour-long talk with House Speaker Newt Gingrich. It was shocking, says a Gingrich staffer. Newt usually slots people for 10 minutes, sometimes less. And while Travolta was walking down a congressional hallway, New York Democrat Carolyn Maloney pushed through some 20 fans and proclaimed, "I've always dreamed of dancing with you." Travolta took her outstretched hand, and the two tangoed down the hall. Republican and Democratic consultants are so serious about getting big names to Washington that they have set up computer databases tracking celebrities' political interests. Type in pro-life, and the GOP software spits out Mel Gibson with a number for his agent. The phrase less regulation gives you humorous Dave Barry. Type in Mid-East and peace on the Democratic software, and Richard Dreyfuss appears. Punch in environment, and the abundant responses include Tom Cruise and LL Cool J. Robert Redford and Paul Newman are listed under several headings. To attract celebrities, politicians have to assure them that they will be shielded from the harsh treatment customary for outsiders in Washington. Newt Gingrich's office has sent along handlers to tag along with visiting celebs to help them navigate questions from reporters and lawmakers, handlers. The Clinton White House increased its use of such chaperones ever since it bungled celebrity involvement at the 1993 inauguration. Right after Clinton's election, the inaugural committee created a mini-scandal by not inviting many of the country's top film stars to the celebration. After the New York Times reported the snafu, the Clinton camp assigned each star a celebrity coordinator to iron out the details. "We couldn't piss them off," says a prominent inaugural official. "They were coded in my files as just way too important. Better to annoy some other donor." Even so, when they get here, things can very easily go wrong, says Jennifer Laszlo, the founder of Laszlo & Associates, a Washington firm that trains non-politicians in policy issues. Actors are used to reading from scripts and having people respect everything they say. Here, people who know a lot more than they do will ask them off-the-cuff questions. Celebrity embarrassment is not just hypothetical. In 1985, the Republicans lambasted Jane Fonda, Jessica Lange, and Sissy Spacek for testifying before a Democratic task force on agriculture. The panel was examining the impact on family farms of President Reagan's proposed cuts in subsidies. The Republicans reasonably pointed out that the only apparent qualification the actors had for talking about farming was that they had recently started movies about family farms. The three were teased relentlessly after they were unable to answer basic questions about farming. 4 years later, Meryl Streep plunged into controversy when she led a campaign against Alar, a preservative sprayed on apples. In her passionate congressional testimony, she said the chemical would cause cancer in thousands of children. Streep's message devastated the industry, costing it more than $100 million and putting some family-owned orchards out of business. But the proof about Alar was never conclusive, and 1 year later, renowned food scientist Joseph Rosen wrote a definitive report on the preservative, concluding there was never any legitimate scientific study to justify the Alar scare. Streep's fiasco changed the conventional wisdom among Hollywood agents that being politically correct and outspoken was a no-brainer. So last June, the Hollywood Republican Caucus, an independent group, sent a letter to agents and movie studios explaining that actors benefit from good political involvement. Quote, "By endorsing solid, all-American legislation, your fans will appreciate you, and that will show at the box office," the letter said. It listed a column of good issues, which included anything with children and valuing religion. Among the bad issues were pro-choice, anti-logging, and anti-smoking. The risk factor was high when Joan Van Ark was on Capitol Hill for the American Humane Association. In her speech, she mentioned that violent prisoners usually had been animal abusers as children. During a question and answer period, a reporter asked Van Ark for a citation on that statistic. She became visibly flustered, flipping her hair side to side and babbling unrelated phrases. Rushing to prevent a celebrity meltdown, AHA officials promised to deliver the reference, but it was clear that Van Ark had never seen the study she was quoting. When reporters raised their hands to ask additional questions, an apparently worried Van Ark asked with a straight face, "Do you want to know who cuts my hair?" One pollster who saw Van Ark's press conference says she should stick to the scripts. "The issue is perfect. She's against animal abuse. There's no one who supports hurting pets," he says. But she should stick to public service announcements. She needs a more controlled environment. Maybe so, but the next day, 7 more members of Congress urged the Department of Health and Human Services to accelerate its review of the petition. They had seen Van Ark on the news. All right, after reading this article, there's so many things that ring a bell. Number one, I found it interesting that Joan Van Ark was in town speaking about animal abuse. And 2 blocks away, President Clinton was talking about a balanced budget, which was the most important political news of the summer, if not the year. Interesting how they happened at the exact same time. It almost seems like maybe one was a distraction for the other. I don't know. Second, it was so interesting how when Christopher Reeve got involved, how easy it was for him to get a meeting and how quickly all of the things he wanted passed got passed. The fact that a bill is 10 times more likely to get passed when a celebrity is involved is very telling of our society in general. It's been proven in this article that they might not know the most about each subject that they speak about, but they're very eloquent speakers and they can definitely read a script very well. And they're very good at evoking emotion, which a lot of people like to make emotional decisions. Certainly it's okay for these different stars to have opinions about their own beliefs, but we as Americans just have to be careful about what they're trying to sell us, what they're being used for, what are they being paid to sell us. As the old phrase goes, follow the money. That does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.